Why, hello, ladies and gentlemen. On today's show, take a look at your smartphones. Take a look at your calendars. Whatever it is that you use to tell what day it is. It is 2/22/22. That's right. How cool is that? All number twos for the day today. And in honor of it, we are looking over the Padres past and present, modern and, ancient, the greatest, most important players to ever wear number two in the San Diego Padres franchise history. It's going to be a blast, guys. You know what it is. Here we go.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Tuesday, February 22nd. And hang on to that date. Hang on to that date, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, as always, with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You might be familiar with some of my baseball-related work at places like Baseball FYI, Friars on Base, Off Bench Baseball, or Just Baseball, to which I am a staff writer for. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, or at LO_Padres. That's the Twitter account for the show. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Padres your hashtag first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. And today's show, guys, I told you to keep an eye on the date. It is February 22nd. February is what month? The second month of the year, right? And the 22nd is the current day. And what year are we in? 2022. That's right. 2/22/22. It is very gimmicky. It's silly, I know, in a lot of ways. It's very arbitrary in a lot of ways. But still, we want to talk about this because this is a big deal. The fact that this doesn't happen every so often. Next time this will happen is in 2033 is the next time this one. To celebrate this funny little date occurrence, I'm going to be talking to you guys today about Padres wore the number 2, kind of overlooking the franchise history, past, present, ancient, you know what I mean? Some of the guys that you probably haven't heard of, and determine, who was the best player to wear number 2. And just most importantly, just going through all the players that wore number 2. And I was actually surprised by how, a lot more interesting the Padres franchise history is, even if not necessarily their best players ever wore number 2. Certainly a lot of interesting players, guys. So we're going to be talking about that and much more. Let's ride, everybody. The first player that I wanted to talk about that I saw when doing a little bit of research, and by a little bit of research, I did a decent amount. I have been reprimanded before, ladies and gentlemen, for not doing enough preparation before a podcast. Preparation before a podcast. This time I did do so. The first person that I came across was from 1969, so very early on in the Padres franchise history, John Sipin. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Sipin. And look, the reason why I wanted to talk about him is he is definitely not the best player to ever play for the Padres that wore number 2. Actually, arguably that if everybody I would be talking about today, the furthest from it, right? But what's so interesting about him, and I saw a lot of this from an article over at Santa Cruz Sentinel, the Santa Cruz Sentinel, that was basically talking about his career in Japan. He signed with the Taiyo Whales, currently the Yokohama Bay Stars, in 1972 and instantly became one of the best second basemen in Japanese baseball during the 1970s. And that's funny because he only played one season for the Padres. I actually don't have the one season in front of me right now. I should probably pull that up. And it was, well, as you could tell, pretty unremarkable. I mean, he didn't do much. He only played one season with the ball club, had a couple hits and whatnot. Let me see if I can bring that up right here. He had one season. He had 2 home runs, a 223 batting average, a 250 on base percentage. So this isn't even like, did he hit no, he was just not a very good baseball player. But then he becomes somewhat of a sensation over in Japan, not just because he played well, but because he became like a fan favorite. And actually, just in terms of let's talk about the stats, right? He played his best season in 1975, hitting 34 home runs and 82 ribbies with a 295 batting average, and also won the Japanese Golden Glove Award. And he was the first foreigner to be awarded the Golden that the first foreigner to ever be awarded that award in Japan. That's pretty nuts. He was eventually traded to some other teams, the Yomiuri Giants in 1978, hit over 300 in each of his seasons with the Giants, retired in 1980. It's just interesting because he gained a lot of popularity because of his look, his hair, his beard, right? They gave him nicknames. He had these extravagant outfits and whatnot. And people just kind of, took a liking to him. I mean, if you just go and look up the pictures of this guy, you would see that he's kind of crazy. And it was interesting in the kind of piece over at the Santa Cruz Sentinel, him just talking about how, like, as a foreigner there, like, he didn't necessarily talk to many people, you know what I mean? Because he didn't understand the language. Obviously, he eventually started to learn some of it. But, like, at the beginning, he kind of just, like, hung out and didn't really speak all that much, but he became so famous that he said that he had to go to restaurants and, like, just look at the wall, right? He would, or not look at, basically look at the wall. He had to go back of restaurants because he was so recognizable in Japan. And it was so, like, interesting to see a forwarder kicking ass over the Japanese baseball league. So this is just such a funny thing because his career with the Padres, completely unremarkable, completely. Right? Completely unremarkable. But this is a guy who had a crazy lifestyle in terms of his clothing, in terms of his look, and he was just a great player. He got into fights on the mound and all this stuff. He was a sensation over in Japan. So shout out to Giant Sipin. Hopefully I'm saying that name correctly, as definitely one of the more interesting guys that's worn number 2 in Padres history. But that doesn't mean he's the only one that we have to talk about. All right, let's be very clear, guys. Another one that I found was Johnny Grubb, who was basically just a solid player. Right, he played under. Now here's the kicker for something that's the most interesting about this. He played under new manager at the time, Don Zimmer. You might have remembered that fellow if you're a Yankees fan, which I grew up a Yankees fan for people who are new to this podcast. So that was definitely a fun little note to pick up there. And in 1974, was kind of his best season of all Padres who qualified for the National League batting title. He led in batting average 286, on base percentage 355, a 758 OPS. He was pretty good. And that year, New York Mets manager, here's another name for you, Yogi Berra, selected Grubbs as an all-star reserve and the Padres' only representative for the game in Pittsburgh. In his only at-bat, he popped up to shortstop. I'm saying that correctly. I'm a little loopy right now. And part of the reason I'm a little loopy, by the way, I spent like an hour trying to get my Wordle. Like, look at this for all my YouTube listeners. I have 4 yellows right now. Anybody who's watching, like, you've probably already figured out the Wordle, but I am an idiot. But anyway, he popped out to shortstop, and that was who was pitching? Oakland hurler and eventual Hall of Famer Catfish Hunter. How about that? That's a fun little for Padres fans and what have you. So, look, not that remarkable of a career overall, but just a solid guy, Johnny Grubb, for the Padres, who wore number 2. Yeah, I mean, what do you want from me? Again, not as remarkable as Mr. Johnny Sipin, but still a solid player. And Grubb, I mean, I know we all think of Grubhub when you hear that last name probably right now, but nonetheless, great name. Great name, if I do say so myself. Before we talk about some other guys, and this is when we get into a little bit of the figures and maybe even just the more complicated figures that have worn number 2 in Padres baseball history. So we've had some weird, quirky, fun ones with Sipin, but we've also had some ones that were a little bit of a problem, guys. And longtime Padres fans, hardcore Padres fans, probably know one of those guys that I'm going to be getting into. But before we get into that, I need to talk to you about something that isn't controversial, that isn't polarizing. Not even one bit. Not one bit. Best protein bars that you can get, ladies and gentlemen. They are, of course, the Built Bars. What I love about them is, look, I go back and forth with New Year's resolutions, but this year I'm committing, and that's because Built Bars have helped me out whenever I have that sweet tooth urge. Guys, you got to try them out. They've even got Built Bar Puffs, which are kind of like, they have like the energy of like Almond Joys almost, except like better. You know what I mean? I don't know how to best explain it, but those are really good. Check out the macros on these things. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So they're healthy for you. You get it. All right. We get it. They're protein bars. I mean, that's the whole point of them, right? But they also come in a great variety of flavors: mint brownie, coconut almond. This month, they've got the white chocolate cookies and cream. They've got cherry barcia. They've got eggnog and ginger it's in honor of Christmas, which I know was a long time ago, but even still, if you're still in a Christmas mood for whatever reason, but they have all these flavors that come out. That's what I love about them the most, guys. So what are you waiting for? Go to built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off your order. Remember, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. But one more thing, guys, I want to talk to you about Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible, flat out impossible, for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. But thankfully, you have computers, you have phones with access to rockauto.com. Guys, save time and money. Why would you spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? For example, Honda Odyssey fuel pump, it costs $353 from your local chain store and only $216 from Rock Auto, guys. I mean, what more do I have to say? They, I could tell you how easy to navigate their pages and that they have everything you want, but the cost is the biggest selling point. I know you people. I know you Padres fans. You guys are smart, and smart people use Rock Auto, guys. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck and write Locked On in their "How'd you hear about us" box so they know that we sent you. Greatly appreciate that, guys. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Woo wee! I think I put a little bit of effort into those, right? I think I did pretty good on those. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not to flex on Maine or anything like that, guys, but I think I did pretty okay there. Of course, guys, as always, thank you for making Locked On Padres your hashtag first listen every day. Free and available on all platforms. Let's get into more of them. Let's get into more number twos in Padres history. The next person who I alluded to a lot, I talked about this guy a lot, and I remember when I did an episode on this team that he was one of the subjects of it. And he was one of the subjects because a mini documentary that I watched talked about the team and talked about this player specifically. That was Alan Wiggins. He was part of the 1984 Padres, which is widely regarded as one of the best Padres team ever. Granted, I know that when you look up what's it called? When you look up the 1984 Padres, you don't exactly find like crazy numbers offensively. It's really just, again, it's not all that impressive when you just look at the numbers and what have you. And Alan Wiggins was kind of one of those guys that was supposed to really help be a big part of the offense. Obviously, you had Tony Gwynn, of course, Mr. Padre, but the big thing that happened with Alan Wiggins, despite all the talent, was he had a lot of personal problems. During his major league career, he struggled with drug addiction, and that resulted in a litany of arrests and suspension from baseball. He actually, because of how poor his off-the-field struggles were, and I don't want to demean them because addiction is a health thing, and it is it's a sickness. It's really sad. He actually was traded by the Padres in 1985 to Baltimore, where he ended up spending 3 seasons. And then after baseball, he was diagnosed with AIDS, and he was the first MLB player known to die of the disease. So not to be super, like, I'm trying not to be a super downer. Let me be very clear. I'm not trying to be too much of a downer, but like Alan Wiggins is kind of like that the black sheep is a little bit an oversimplification of it, but the black sheep of that 1984 Padres team, which just has so many good vibes to it. Everybody that has said they had the swagger, go look up, like, I don't remember what it was called because this was like 2 years ago. Long time listeners of the podcast might have seen this. I did like a time machine viewing the 84 Padres, one of the best teams in Padres history. But I did an episode on it, and there was this like mini documentary. I don't know if it was on ESPN or whatever, but it was like really fun. It was only like 30 minutes that kind of just talked about this team, and they had a swagger, right? And it was, what can I say? Like, it was really a lot in the World Series to, I actually don't remember. I'm blanking on that right now. They lose in the World Series to the Detroit Tigers, it looks like. Yes, they lost to the Detroit Tigers 4-1. This is when, oh, that's right. Hold on. Let me find him. Goose Gossage was on this team, right? And what I loved making fun of Goose Gossage, because Goose Gossage has been get off my lawn personalities when it comes to the modern major leagues. Like, he's always dogging guys. I'm pretty sure he's dogged like Bryce Harper before. He's probably dogged a bunch of players who have bat flips. So I've hated on Goose Gossage for a long time, and he actually blew a game in the World Series, which is one thing I talked about in the episode. But yeah, Alan Wiggins, very unfortunate. So there isn't a lot of great history all the time, not just in terms of statistical prowess, But in terms of literally like that number 2 jersey is a little bit cursed in Padres history because Alan Wiggins was a great player. He had a lot of potential. You know what I mean? I think that himself, and then I know that some people have told me Khalil Green, which is a little bit more modern of a player. And we're getting into modern players in a little bit. It's just Padres who just couldn't quite put it together on the field and seems to have just had some personal problems with obviously Wiggins being kind of the biggest one there. But of course, it's not all down. It's not all a doubter. Just let me pick you guys up a little bit. And what better to pick you up with a speedster? Bip Roberts is the next person that I want to mention that I found out wore number 2 for the Padres. He was a very, very fast player. He finished 8th in MVP voting for not the Padres, though. The Reds in 1992. They actually traded him, which is very, very unfortunate with Bip Roberts. And he had like a decent stretch in Cincinnati. And then he re-signed with the Padres in 1994 and did manage to have a decent kind of stretch there. MLB best 24-game hitting streak that season. He would finish 2nd in the National League in singles. And on top of that, here's a fun little history thing for you. You guys have heard of this dude before. He broke up Pedro Martinez's extra innings perfect game with a double in the 10th inning. How about that, guys? I mean, that's just... See, this is what I love about baseball history, is just finding players that I haven't really heard of that eventually just like connect to something that I've heard of. And one of those is Pedro Martinez, widely regarded as one of the best pitchers ever. Some people think he might be the best pitcher ever when you take into account like the fact that he pitched at the height of the steroid era. And he was still like, I think it's ERA plus or something like that. It was like 300. Like it's something broken, right? Like he's one of the 3-5 best pitchers probably in Major League Baseball history, according to most people, right? But yeah, Bip Roberts overall though, just kind of a solid player. I mean, he had a decent on-base percentage too, which is what's interesting. Yes, he was a speedster. And when you think of speedsters today, you think of Billy Hamilton's, you think of Adalberto Mendez's, you think of another guy we're going to be talking about a little bit. I don't want to spoil it for you. But these guys who are speedsters, but then they never get on base, right? And that was not the case with Bip Roberts. 333, 400 in his first technical appearance for the Padres. 301, 391 in 1989, 309, 375 in 1990, 342, 340. Oh, hold on. 281, 342. That would have been pretty nuts, right? 281, 342. And then eventually he leaves and then comes back to the Padres. Like he was a really solid hitter. His most stolen bases that he had in a season was 40 Cincinnati, which was, like I said, pretty incredible. He was a speedster, but a solid player. And it's funny, I actually saw like a couple videos on Black History Month stuff with him. That was really, really cool. Just him talking about growing up in Oakland and just what it was like being surrounded by some shady, not so great figures, but they looked after him because they like saw that there was potential in him. So they didn't want him to get caught up in some of the bad stuff. But it just goes to show you, like, players come from all sorts of backgrounds, right? And they go in all sorts of futures, as we saw with Mr. Sipin at the beginning. Like everything, so many different directions in Padres history. And I imagine same thing goes for a whole lot of other teams. Next person on the list, though, that I want to mention before we get into some of the modern players that people might be familiar with is Jody Reed, second baseman on the 1996 Padres, which I also did a breakdown of back in the early days of the pod, kind of around the time when I did the 1984 Padres breakdown. And this team was great, but it didn't make the World Series. The 1998 Padres made the World Series, ended up losing to the Yankees because they were just a buzzsaw for the latter half of the 90s. Like nobody could beat them. But 1996 was a really great team. Steve Finley, Ken Caminiti, all those guys, some solid pitching. And Jody Reed, I mean, he wasn't that great. He's only kind of memorable for the fact that he was that second baseman on that 96 team that released for a podcast. I did the breakdown of the team. You guys can go look that up. And also, it was the year I was born, and he wore it number 2 for the Padres, which was very cool. Another one, by the way, if you're curious about that 88 team, Andy Sheets was the middle infielder for the 1998 Padres, which was the World Series team, number 2 as well. So that's very cool. Yeah, that 96 Padres team was just awesome. Steve Finley was good. Ricky Henderson was on that team with a really strong on-base percentage, but just didn't not get enough runs. He didn't have really enough power. He was just walking a lot. Ricky Henderson, just like, we need more fun history on Ricky Henderson. You know what I mean? Because everybody only thinks of him as a speedster, but really he was like an all-around player. I know he was a speedster, don't get me wrong, but I don't know. I just feel like we deserve more about him. But you know what else we deserve more of, guys? We deserve more on the modern players who wore number 2 in San Diego Padres baseball history. But before we get into those folks, let me just quickly tell you about Bet Online, guys. Football might be over, right? Hopefully you enjoyed the Super Bowl. I thought it was a pretty good game, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to, I don't know, where the next head coach, where the fired coach is going to land next, all that type of stuff. BetOnline is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs, remaining the number one spot for a while now. They're just the best, and I've been talking about them forever. And of course, not just basketball, best place to go for hockey, boxing, UFC, Olympic coverage, whatever you're looking for. They got it, guys. Head to the website today or use your mobile device. BetOnline, where the game starts. Wow, that was a very good slurp of water that I just took for all my YouTube listeners. Or I always say that. I always say YouTube listeners instead of viewers. Listeners are for audio. Viewers are for video, Javi. V and V, right? It's just you would think I'd get this down by now, but whatever, guys. Let's keep it moving. Let's talk about some of the more modern players. This is where I was like, okay, all right. I became a more hardcore baseball fan maybe around like 08, 09, 07, a little bit earlier than that, but I follow the Yankees, obviously, as I mentioned earlier in the pod. So this is around the time when I start to at least recognize the games a little bit more. If you're from old school, unless you're like an all-timer, like your Pedros, like your Ricky Henderson, who we talked about before, like your Tony Gwynns, I probably don't know too much about you. But when it comes to the modern guys, there has been some Padres that have worn number 2. And here's the first one. Here's a name. Here's definitely a shout out for Mets fans, if I'm not mistaken, because Mets fans had a whole kerfuffle with this guy, because if I'm not mistaken, he kind of fell off for them when he joined the team. I'm just looking up. Yeah, he kind of fell off for them. It is Jason Bay. Jason Bay for the Padres. He was a Padre, but only for a second. He wore number 2. 2 days after his debut with the Padres, he suffered a broken right wrist after being hit by a pitch, which is unfortunate because in his first kind of game, he hit like a home run. Nice debut for the Padres. He was traded along with Oliver Perez and Corey Stewart for Brian Giles, though. So you might think that this ends poorly, but actually he did net Brian Giles, who was a great player. Some people even said like a fringe, like he like made it onto the ballot, you know what I mean, for Hall of Fame, but like he was a pretty good player. And Jason Bay also ended up a great player. So I got nervous when I saw the Padres traded him away, but actually they did get something good out of him. Solid stint with the team. Even at 32 years old, when they acquired Brian Giles, he finished 9th in MVP in 2009, which featured a 119 walk season. Pretty well. So Jason Bay is more of a legend for number 2 for the Padres because of what he netted the Padres and Brian Giles, right? So that's kind of cool thing to note. When it comes to Padres history. So, hey, every now and then the Padres make a good trade. I know we're all saying that the Padres are a mess and they don't know what they're doing. Every now and then they do something right. Now, some could argue a broken clock is right, twice a day or whatever, but still, nonetheless, it is pretty cool. Another person that wore number 2 for the Padres is Kerry Robinson. And let me be clear. As a player, not all that much that's important here, but he's known for a couple of distinct feats. This is what I was looking up online. He pinch hit in the 8th inning for Mark McGwire in the 2001 NLDS Game 5, which basically was the last moment of the Slugger's career, which is very interesting. He's the only MLB player in He is the only player in MLB history to wear both the numbers 00 for the 1999 Cincinnati Reds and 0 for the 2002-2003 St. Louis Cardinals at some point in a career. That's kind of cool. He was featured in a book, which is pretty cool too, which was by let me see here. It is implied that he might. What happened to my computer? My computer just died. All right, but anyway, it talked about his relationship with Tony La Russa, which was really messed up. Tony La Russa is a player that, and now coach, that a lot of people are probably familiar with. So he's known for a couple things, but that 000 thing is kind of interesting. So, but otherwise, I don't even bother reading the slash line for this guy. He did not do anything for the Padres whatsoever. Next up, though, is Edgar Gonzalez. Another player that did not have a remarkable stint with the Padres, guys. He was only the 6th player in franchise history, though, with an RBI hit in his first career plate appearance and first since Kevin Higgins in 1993. So that's pretty cool. I don't know about you guys, but like for daily fantasy and like those, like if you do like something where you're betting who will get a hit, maybe for that the beat the streak thing that ESPN does, like I like to pick prospects on their first day. You know what I mean? Who make their debuts. I love doing that. And it doesn't even have to be a top prospect. I love doing that. But anyway, Gonzalez made his debut at 29 years, 333 days old, making him the second oldest player to make his debut for the Padres, the first being Akinori Otsuka at 32 years old, 84 days old. So, known for a couple stats, but otherwise, like I said, not a remarkable Padres career. The next person to wear number 2 for the Padres definitely had he shined bright at one point, and that's BJ Upton, otherwise known as Melvin Upton for Padres fans. He look, when you look up some of his kind of numbers, his stint with the Tampa Bay Rays, he was awesome with the Tampa Bay Rays. Actually, if I could pull up his fan graphs, he had a couple like 6 war seasons, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if I can find that really quickly. Let's see, BJ Upton, but his tenure with the Padres, this is around the time, guys, when he was with the Padres, when I actually started following them, but it was in 2015, which was basically the last time he became anything resembling relevant. He gets traded from the Braves to the Padres after spending a couple seasons there, and then every season before that with Tampa. But with Tampa, 2007, he had a 4.5 F4 season, and then the next year, 4.8 F4 season, then 2.3, 3.9, 3.8, 3.4. He was a key, like kind of like that engine, that background piece that you don't always think about because those mid 2000s Tampa teams had Evan Longoria, but he was a really solid player for them too and very consistent until he just kind of dramatically just fell off after going to Atlanta. And then with the Padres, he produced a 1.5 F4 season, which wasn't as bad, batting 259 with a 327 on base and 429 slugging. I always, though, will remember Melvin Upton / BJ Upton for when he got into a fight with Evan Longoria in the dugout, because that was just wild, because you don't see that all that often. And that was even worse than the Tatis Manny Machado one, because that one looked like people had to really hold him back. You know what I'm saying? That one looked a little bit worse, but hey, maybe I'm just being a little bit too biased in our Padres' favor, guys. And then we have 2 players left, guys, that have wore number 2 for the Padres. And unfortunately, one of these 2 is another one a little bit along the lines of Alan Wiggins. Thankfully, it didn't end quite as poorly for him, but in terms of just the overall talent and just having some off-field problems, there are similarities. It is Everth Cabrera. He had high potential, but didn't really pan out. I remember actually drafting this guy in fantasy baseball, and I hadn't really heard of him before. I think that I saw the name Cabrera, and I thought it was Melky Cabrera or something like that, who was someone I was familiar with as a Yankees fan. Growing up, Everth Cabrera was fast. I mean, he was incredible when it came to stealing bases. He led the NL in he led the National League in stolen bases in 2012, but overall, I mean, didn't really have as much of a stint as people thought. I mean, people thought he was going to be the next like kind of star shortstop for the Padres, and he really didn't turn out to be that, which is kind of, unfortunate in a lot of ways. But he did have an all-star season in 2013 where it was a legitimately good season, by the way. I mentioned earlier that most speedsters these days seem to be these guys that like can swipe 50 bags, but they can't do anything else, right? Which is, it's just really sad. Like, I wish that speed was more part of the game. I wish the stealing bases, they made it easier, actually, because I think watching stolen bases is so much fun. But in 2013 with the Padres, 283, 355, 381, not the best slugging / line. And he did manage to swipe 37 bags. Year before, he swiped 44. Like I said, led the NL in stolen bases in 2012. He was a fixture in fantasy baseball for those 2 years, basically. And then kind of promptly fell off, right? The season after that 355, 286, or 283, 355 / line, I should say, 232, and then 208 the next 2 years. On base percentages outside, or I should say below 300. And he ends up getting moved to the Baltimore Orioles, where he didn't do too much. And then his career was kind of over. But instead of, it's not just that the expectations and the talent didn't pan out. It's also that he had some struggles, led the national, hold on. He had a domestic violence charge in 2012 and also was arrested in 2014 on DUI marijuana. The domestic violence charge was dropped, but the DUI thing. Driving under the influence of marijuana was not. So again, Everth Cabrera, a little bit of a troubled player off the field for sure, and also on the field did not pan out, I think, as a lot of people had hoped. It was unfortunate. So both him and Alan Wiggins. Alan Wiggins seems like it was a much worse situation for sure. That one was really dark. Again, I recommend everyone going to check out that documentary on the '84 Padres. But Everth Cabrera, man, did it turn out too well? Don't get me wrong, the Padres got a little bit lucky with the shortstop position a few years later. Let's be very, very clear here. We've done pretty all right so far. But the last person on this list, you know, I had to talk about him at some point. It is Sir Trent Grisham, the fella that everybody likes. He has the flipping the double bird thing that I can't do on video that made him kind of famous on Padres Twitter, walk into the dugout, the batting glove thing, the no batting gloves, the way he swings the bat, the swagger that he brings when he holds up the fingers for as many home runs he has. He has the swagger. He's got the juice. Has he lived up to maybe some of people's expectations, including my own? No, not necessarily. He did have a little bit of a rough year, but so did the rest of the team. And it's funny because Trent Grisham, if he performs well, and I think that he has the talent to do so, I think he has a great eye at the plate. While he does strike out a little bit much, he's got a decent amount of pop. He can run the bases, and he's got really good defensive skills if he can get a little bit better in that department. I mean, if he hangs out for a while, it's not impossible that Trent Grisham could go down as the best number 2 in franchise history. Granted, is that saying too much when it comes to all this, right? Because when you look at this ain't no Yankees, where they have Derek Jeter. This is a team that has Jimmy Fox or Roberto. Was Roberto Alomar number 2? I don't feel like looking it up. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but not at that degree. But the Padres, like, he could end up being the best number 2 in franchise history. For now, to me, I think that it goes between Bip Roberts or my guy Jody Sipin for the most legendary number 2s. All right, because Bip Roberts had some really cool moments, really good on base guy, just a solid baseball player and a speedster. And then Sipin, because of an incredible Japanese career, including literally winning the first as a forwarder Golden Glove Award over there in Japan. So I just think those are the 2 most remarkable ones. But overall, yeah, not too much craziness with the number 2 in Padres history, but still a lot of cool stuff, I think, to be found. So hopefully you guys enjoyed me nerding out. Professor Reyes, a little history lesson for all you folks. But before we get into the future of this podcast, guys, because I've got some really cool teases that I want to do, you made me your first listen. Now make your second listen. Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. And also go shout out my guy Lindsey Crosby, who a couple weeks ago we did a podcast crossover on Mackenzie Gore. You could listen to that episode, but he actually gave me this idea for the 222 thing, which is so shouts to him. Go listen to his podcast. He's doing so much fun stuff over there. Seriously, he's killing it. Locked On Only Prospects. But in terms of the future of this podcast, before we wind down, on Friday, I know that usually my schedule has been Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but this week because of the date thing, and because I did a podcast on Friday with Stacy and Abby over at Locked On Yankees, changed it up a little bit. But Friday's episode is going to be a fun one. We're going to be talking with my buddy Colby Olson, a staff writer and analytics folk over at Just Baseball, the site that I write for. And we're going to be talking about fantasy, and specifically fantasy baseball when it comes to Padres players. Who's getting overdrafted? Should Tatis go number 1? Where should Manny Machado go? Is Trent Grisham being underrated? What should we do with Padres fantasy players, right? That's going to be a super, super fun nerdy chat for all my fantasy fans. And I imagine a lot of you guys, fantasy still translates to real life, right? It still does in a lot of ways. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Going to be talking about Trent Grisham finally next week. Probably going to be doing that. My overall episode on him, what they need from him heading into 2022, because I actually think that he's one of the most important players the Padres need to do well. Planning a bunch of other crossovers and whatnot. Lindsey Crosby may be back to talk about CJ Abrams for some more prospect talk. That one should just be all good vibes too, because CJ Abrams has so much hype and potential, I think, according to a lot of experts. And then also, happy to announce that there may be some plans in the works to talk to actual Padres players. A name that rhymes with Slevin Mops. Was that a decent enough rhyme? Yeah, that rhymes with his name. It's in the works, guys. It's in the works. So look forward to all that and much more, guys. But that all being said, the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the pod Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow me on Daniel or at _Padres. Check out the show on YouTube, Locked On Padres, if you want to see my beanie and my Bulworth Academy shirt, which is a little bit Padres colors, I must say. And until next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. Right, Friar Faithful homies?